Over 2 years down the line, and there's still talk for a second season for the Obi-Wan Kenobi show.
If you ever need my help again, you know where to find me.
Season 1 got off to a strong start. In fact, it broke Disney Plus streaming records at the time. However, it's also one of the most criticised Star Wars projects to date.
I am what you made me.
So grab your lightsabers and brace yourselves as we dive in on the potential of a Kenobi Season 2.
Anakin's gone. I am what remains.
Just because they could, doesn't mean they should. Before we get into it, remember to leave a like on the video if you enjoy it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to catch more of our Star Wars videos. Now, with all that out of the way, let's get into it.
You know, you were right. He just needs to be a boy. The future will take care of itself.
Ewan McGregor recently received his star on a Hollywood Walk of Fame,
Thank you for being the best Jedi Master.
where the topic of Star Wars came up once Hayden Christensen took to the stage. The pair made their interest clear in returning for a second season, picking up where they left off in the first. To be honest, they've both been pretty upfront about wanting to return ever since the show premiered. Obi-Wan Kenobi was easily one of the most anticipated Star Wars projects to date. Fans knew early on that it would see the return of Hayden Christensen, which was the first time audiences would have seen him on screen in Star Wars since 2005's Revenge of the Sith, with the big buzz about the show being a rematch between Obi-Wan and Vader between episodes 3 and 4, so the fact it broke Disney Plus records and became the most watched premiere at the time shouldn't come as that much of a surprise. The show itself focused on the transformation of Obi-Wan from a man struggling with his past, the fall of the Jedi and his Padawan Anakin, to Alec Guinness's version of Obi-Wan, the wise Jedi we meet in A New Hope. The show did, however, catch a lot of us by surprise when it was a young Leia who went along for the journey with old Ben instead of a young Luke, which in turn gives a whole new meaning to the first moments of the original Star Wars movie, where Leia reaches out to Obi-Wan for help. It was, however, Hayden Christensen's return and portrayal as Anakin and Vader that was one of the show's biggest highlights, further merging the two characters into one, with Hayden's face now being behind the mask. Star Wars had shown us Obi-Wan many times before at various different points during his life, with the most in-depth look coming in the Clone Wars. Now in Kenobi, it was about how he dealt with the aftermath of that, whilst giving us nods to both what came before and what's to come after. Now it's worth noting the show did have the opportunity to answer a burning question left behind by the original trilogy, which was why couldn't Obi-Wan help Luke in his fight against Vader in The Empire Strikes Back,
I cannot interfere.
when he could during the trench run where Luke blew up the Death Star in A New Hope. After Obi-Wan's death, he was able to coach Luke through his mission, reminding him to pull from his training, which helped Luke channel the Force to hit the bullseye, which was the Death Star's vent. However, when Luke was at his most vulnerable, with nowhere near the amount of training needed to defeat a Sith Lord, let alone one of Darth Vader's caliber, Obi-Wan insisted Luke had to face him alone and was nowhere to be heard or seen. Now, perhaps Obi-Wan was sticking to his line to Yoda, where he told him he couldn't kill Anakin and he couldn't play a part in that, which he seemed to do in their final fight in the Kenobi show as well, but there could have been more to it. Perhaps now, one with the Force, the Jedi knew the collapse of the Empire was inevitable and decided to let things play out on their own. Although I don't think they knew exactly how the Emperor and Vader would be defeated, I guess they saw Luke as being powerful enough to eventually do that, either him or someone else. But it is pretty clear they never anticipated it to be Anakin who would be the one to bring it all down, as Obi-Wan was pretty adamant his friend was dead and Vader could never be redeemed. For all the show gave us, it's fair to say there's a lot it didn't, which ultimately led it to receiving largely mixed reviews. Going into the show, some fans were pretty much already against the idea of another showdown between Obi-Wan and Vader,
I am what you made me.
firmly of the opinion that a duel on Mustafar was meant to be the last before their meeting in A New Hope, leaving anything else went against George Lucas's story. And as the show went on, interest from the casual viewers began to wane, whilst the criticisms the show faced grew louder, most of which were aimed at the writing and directing, and some aimed towards how certain characters were portrayed and their significance to the stories, such as the Grand Inquisitor and Reaver. Now, some of these criticisms were valid and put out in good faith, but there was also some put out from what we could call a less desirable section of the fanbase. With all of that out in the open, if the Kenobi show did return, it's clear it should only do so to serve the greater story, rather than telling one for the sake of it. Now, one of the best ways they could do that, and this is a theory that's been doing the rounds for a few years now, would be by introducing a continuation of the Kenobi bloodline that exists even after his death. We almost had it with Rey in the sequels, and in the show, it was mentioned he had a brother. In the movies, he was depicted as a wise, rule-following Jedi, largely playing it by the book. But if we take it back to the Clone Wars, we saw a different side of him, where he struck up a relationship with Satine Kryze, the Duchess of Mandalore, and Bo-Katan's sister. Anyways, this wasn't just a short-term fling. Obi-Wan was deeply committed, even admitting had she given the word, he would have left the Jedi Order to be with her, so he was pretty into it.
Had you said the word, I would have left the Jedi Order.
He likely chose the name Ben after the fall of the Jedi, due to that being the nickname Satine gave him all those years prior. Of course, Satine didn't make it out of the Clone Wars alive, as she was killed by Maul right before the Battle of Sundari. However, it was revealed she had a nephew called Corky Kryze. Now, the thing with this is Satine only had one known sibling, being Bo-Katan, so that would make Corky Bo-Katan's son. However, Corky calls both of the sisters aunts, so the simplest answer would be that there was a third Kryze sister somewhere in the mix. But given that they've never been mentioned before, and Dave Filoni loves to put the bricks in place for the future, there's also a chance that Corky is actually Obi-Wan and Satine's love child, perhaps one he had no knowledge of. After all, his age does pretty much align with when the Jedi and the Mandalorian Duchess had a thing going on. The possible direction Kenobi Season 2 could take is to explore the Kenobi bloodline, revealing there is another that up until this point has gone undetected, who could also play a part in future Star Wars movies too. If in the future they decide to do a second season of the show, a good solid foundation for it would be to show us his training with Qui-Gon, who has now manifested as a Force ghost.
Well, took you long enough.
Whilst also building on something Obi-Wan related that could carry the character's legacy into future Star Wars stories, such as The Descendant. I don't think there should be another confrontation with Darth Vader though. They got away with it in Season 1 with the movies, not explicitly stating when their last meeting was, but for it to happen in a Season 2, I think it would just be a step too far for most fans out there. Besides, there are a ton of other Star Wars villains out there that he could come up against, one of the biggest being Maul, who would still be active at the time, and although not as much as with Vader, Obi-Wan and Maul share a lot of history too. There's certainly elements in the show that would allow them to come back for another in some way. After all, Obi-Wan offered his services to Bail Organa should they ever be needed again, whilst he also came into contact with the Hidden Path too. So if they ever got in any kind of trouble with, let's say, one of the big crime syndicates such as Crimson Dawn, that could also make a compelling story going forwards. And who knows, perhaps spending more time with Qui-Gon on screen would gain a deeper understanding of the Netherworld of the Force and why Obi-Wan and Yoda, once crossed over, didn't turn up to help Luke in his fight against Vader. Perhaps the answer to that lies somewhere within the Cosmic Force itself. The Obi-Wan Kenobi show went from being one of, if not the most anticipated Star Wars project under Disney, to one of the most criticized Star Wars projects of all time. As I said earlier, some of them were valid, while some came from a place of deep-rooted negativity that seems to have plagued the franchise of late. Regardless if you enjoyed the show yourself or not, I think there's certainly elements in there most Star Wars fans would enjoy, such as the moment Vader's helmet was cracked open in the season finale, exposing Hayden Christensen's face underneath. That was one of the serious highlights for me.
I am not your failure.
Obi-Wan.
Overall, I'd be up for a second season, providing they had the right people involved with the right story in place. We already know Ewan wants to do it, and so does Hayden. Now, I know I said we shouldn't get another confrontation with Vader, but he could still be in the show, perhaps showing us Obi-Wan's actions in another part of the galaxy, negatively impacting the Empire, perhaps through any work with Bail Organa or the Hidden Path, which in turn would then go on to impact Palpatine's Project Necromancer, or even a different rebel group that would one day go on to become part of the Rebel Alliance. One of my gripes with the first season was how at times it looked like it was shot using a mobile phone camera 10 years ago, and the excessive camera shake, especially during the fight scenes, didn't add any extra energy in my opinion, and certainly didn't immerse me any more into it, but rather I just found it annoying. One of the best things they could do with the show would be to bring back Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon for it, and perhaps even more. That'd both be big wins that I think most fans would get behind. Anyways, would you like to see a Kenobi Season 2, and if so, what would you like to happen in it? As always, drop your thoughts, theories, and wildest speculations down in the comments below. Remember to leave a like on the video if you've enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you'd like to catch more. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one. May the Force be with you.